Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing fantastic. Okay, so you know that I love reading about ancient Rome. I am part Italian, and I haven't got back to the homeland, but my family is not from up north. They're from southern Italy, Calabria, which is next to Sicily, which has more of a relationship historically with the Macedonians and Egyptians right there, because it's on the end, rather than the fancy pants people up in the north. Alright? So, in this book, it gives us some cool points about Italian history, specifically ancient Roman history, and it has a bunch of miscellaneous fun facts for us. And Anthony Everett, I have a couple books by him. He's really a nerd and does a great job on writing in a way that makes history invigorating, and I find this useful. When you study history instead of just your own, you can see so many interesting and valuable lessons of life and struggles of humankind that add to our history on this planet. And good history books are very valuable. I've had horrible history teachers, to be quite honest, who were deathly boring. So I always like reading books by great authors as a better substitute than some teachers who really suck at their job. So this section is titled The Doom of the Gracchi, and I think you'll find this quite cool, inshallah. A widening chasm between the rich and the poor in the 1st century BC heralded the death of the Roman Republic and its replacement by the rule of emperors. So notice this. Roman Republic, here's later coming in, the rule of emperors. The rich enjoyed vast estates and often encroached illegally on state-owned land, while many of the poor were landless. Someone eventually decided to act. Notice these similarities here. The rich enjoyed vast estates. That's the American politicians and owners of corporations. In California, for example, my rent is $1,600 a month. This is very expensive. And so, if you notice how liberals, the posh tech people, who are so fancy, they're so much better than us, and they're Starbucks and fancy pants computers. They have the high real estate, high taxes, and they put a bunch of laws in to where you can't have chickens, you can't grow a garden in your front lawn. Their buildings are not even earthquake safe. You have tons of gangs and slumlords, underfunded police departments, open drug use in the streets, and a lot of people will buy a house in Los Angeles and other places, and they're forced to have homeless people smoking meth and living in tents outside on the sidewalk of their property. And this is causing quite a tense hatred between the upper class and lower class, right? And today you will see that people like Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum will say things like renting and not owning is going to be the way of the future, when if you look at the 17th century Americana philosophy, property and land was something that men should have. I believe in Mexico, I was told, because we're having a second home built there, and in order to have a firearm, you have to own land or be a certain wealth status. And so I wanted to know exactly what my gun rights would be in Mexico, especially since there's cartels. But there is a problem in some of the poor areas that AMLO of Mexico is fixing, where the federal government encroached upon the private indigenous lands. And AMLO has, I believe he started with Sonora tribal peoples. I can't remember the name of the tribe, but I remember seeing the conference. He's giving them their land back, part of their land back, because former presidents corrupted and gave that land away, and then kicked the people off the land. And America did the same thing with the tribes of America, right? Pushed them all into reservations and stole their land. Westward expansion was a huge campaign. And so here you see a similar trend where the height of the Roman Republic elites' enjoyment, they had these vast estates. How much land do they really need? Whereas the poor, they're losing their land, and this is creating tension. You almost see these patterns repeat throughout history. It's quite interesting. In 133 BC, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, I really love these Latin names, was elected a tribune of the people, one of the officials whose job it was to speak for the rights of the masses. He had a radical land reform bill passed into law. So here, Tiberius is what? He is a populist. Now today, the cultural Marxists of the leftist wing of the Democratic Party really denounce property rights. They don't even want you to be able to have a firearm to take care of trespassers and rioters and looters of your both business property and private property. They want you to stand down, and they have the duty to retreat law, where even if you're in your own house and a criminal comes in and they want to execute you, you have to run away. Whereas in Florida and other conservative states, there's a stand your ground law that will allow you to stay and fight and defend your property. That is a populist ideal. And think about how this Tiberius figure, he's a populist. He's doing things for the people, right? He's like, hey, I really want these people to have some land. And he goes about doing that. And let's see what happens. His idea was to redistribute public land to those without small holdings of their own. Think about how people today, they call for housing reform, rent control. People are desperately trying to make a good balance between the landlord and the tenant, right? You don't want the landlords to be oppressed because they have a lot of stress. It's hard to manage apartments. And you want homeowners to be able to actually own a home. You know? You want them to actually have something without having to have 17 roommates. So here, he tried to do something awesome, which was to give the landless land, to redistribute land. It's quite interesting. This greatly offended owners of real estate, especially those who were to be forced to disgorge their ill-gotten gains. So here the elite are like, we don't want to lose our land to the poor. No, we don't want it. Think about the greed. They didn't have that nationalistic mercy to their own people. Just self-centeredness and greed. Infuriated senators rioted, and in the melee, Tiberius was killed. 10 years later, his younger brother, Gias, decided to enter public life too, and his attempt at introducing populist measures brought him a similarly violent end. So both of the Gracchus brothers were executed for trying to pass things to help the people. So this later, the author argues, led to the rule of emperors instead of the Roman Republic. Because the Roman Republic is the senators, right? The Senate and the people of Rome is what they used to say. And then if you look at it, it's like, actually, it's just the Senate. It's not really the people, who are trying. Because if it was the people, you'd want some of these people to have land. Clearly, they didn't want it. So the Gracchus brothers both died because they were trying to make the lives of the people better. It's really quite interesting. And think about this. This was a time of senators writing. Think about that. So senators executing politicians didn't just mean that they only did it with Gaius Julius Caesar. They did it with the Gracchus brothers as well. Quite a dangerous time to be a politician. Now, there's an interesting point here by Appian, the writer, he was a historian of civil wars. He wrote about the Gracchus brothers, "No sword was ever brought into the assembly, and no Roman was ever killed by a Roman until Tiberius Gracchus became the first man to die in civil unrest. From time to time, some elected official would be murdered. Undisciplined arrogance soon became the rule, along with a shameful contempt for law and justice." Notice this. Undisciplined arrogance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us He doesn't like the haughty and the arrogant and the boastful and the prideful, right? And to help the people is a good thing. To not spread corruption in the land, right? To not transgress limits. Here, with these pagans, you can see they clearly didn't have the same thing. And notice how they said how he said shameful contempt for law and justice. Think about how people have misused the word justice today, to where looting and rioting and smashing up private, tiny, immigrant-owned and small family businesses is seen as justice because some criminal had an problem with a cop, where the violence is not inflicted on the person who caused the thing, but bleeds out into the innocent community who had nothing to do with it and will then have to endure both the consequences financially and physically because of someone else's actions. That indeed is anything but justice. Having your business looted and destroyed when you had nothing to do with what happened, that is not justice, right? And that is contempt for the law. Truly it is. When we have our own politicians saying defund police, don't have cops in the schools, people should not be able to hire private security for their land, this is a contempt for the law, while those same politicians are protected by $1,000 security forces at the taxpayer's expense. Just think about that. You can see some parallels between the decay in the Roman Empire and what is happening today, I'd argue. So, after the death of the Gracchi brothers, violent feuding essentially became the norm. But I find this awesome that how many people who claim to be Republicans today and who like the Roman Republic knew that Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus and his brother both tried to pass populist bills, but that land redistribution, right, redistribution is a dirty word for conservatives, that they tried to get that done, try to get that done. I don't think it would be such a bad thing to give land back to some tribes. The problem is companies like Walmart, they used to build some of their stores on Indian burial ground. They really went out of their way to be these kind of weirdos. The Walton family is quite strange. Quite strange. And there's not as many tribal people left that are pure-blooded and who are descendants of those who were directly affected. And now it's a different world. But hopefully more people will have the opportunity to buy land. But it does appear to be the fact that buying land in other countries is actually more affordable than even having a studio apartment or 2-bedroom apartment in California. And that is intentional. And that pressure is going to build. You've seen if housing protests have become a big thing. People are not asking for government funded houses. Some are, but people just don't want to have to work 6 days a week from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., never seeing their kids, never having a break, to live in squalor, while celebrities and politicians have multiple homes, right? So that tension that existed in 133 BC in ancient Rome, again, is rising here today. You know, it's different than in countries where if you had money, there's plenty of land. It's just that there's not enough jobs. In America, rather, it's the opposite. Everything is hijacked to a super high price. And I believe, as do many others, this is an intentional design in order to domesticate and make the population weaker and dependent upon the state so they cannot rebel, and to erode the concept of personal accountability, personal responsibility, and self-reliance, and to make them these sort of coddled rats in a cage, always consistently dependent upon the state. Right? What do you think? What do you think, Val?